Adolf Hitler made a decision in December 1941 that would alter the course of the war and ultimately help seal the fate of his regime. He declared war on the United States of America. He did not have to. Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th. The United States had declared war on Japan, but Germany was not directly attacked. No American army stood at its borders. No American fleet threatened its ports. Yet on December 11th, standing before the Reichstag, Hitler declared war on the largest industrial economy in the world. He believed America was weak. He saw a democracy divided by political debate. He saw racial tensions and assumed instability. He saw a nation of immigrants and mistook diversity for disunity. To him, strength came from ideological conformity and centralized control. He believed the American public would not endure prolonged casualties. He believed industrial mobilization would be slow. He believed the Atlantic Ocean would provide time, enough time to defeat the Soviet Union before American power fully arrived. But he misunderstood the scale of American industry. He misunderstood the flexibility of democratic mobilization, and he misunderstood the effect of Pearl Harbor. Within weeks, American factories began converting to wartime production. Automobile plants shifted to tank manufacturing. Civilian shipyards expanded. Recruitment surged. 3 years later, in late 1944, American troops stood in France. American bombers filled the skies over Germany. American convoys crossed the Atlantic in relentless numbers. The country he had dismissed as fragile was now a central force in the war against him. And the decision made in December 1941, born from confidence and ideology, was beginning to look like one of the greatest strategic miscalculations of the Second World War. In early 1942, Hitler still looked at America with contempt. He believed their soldiers would be inexperienced, their divisions would crumble under pressure, and that a nation of merchants and dreamers could never endure the discipline of total war. He laughed at German generals' warnings about American industrial potential. To him, gigantic factories were meaningless if the people lacked the courage to fight. But reality began to defy his expectations. In November 1942, American forces landed in North Africa. At first, they suffered tactical defeats, most notably at the Battle of Kasserine Pass. To Hitler, it seemed proof that his prejudices were correct. "Weak Americans," he muttered, seeing initial errors as inherent frailty. Yet his commanders observed something else. Americans learned quickly. Every defeat became a lesson. Every mistake was corrected in the next engagement. Tactics improved, coordination strengthened, and their industrial capacity allowed them to replace losses faster than Germany could. Meanwhile, American air power began to make its mark. B-17 and B-24 bombers dominated the European skies, protected by P-51 Mustangs, something Hitler had promised would be impossible. American factories churned out thousands of planes, tanks, and trucks, reaching the Allies faster than the Germans could destroy them. The Lend-Lease program, supplying the Soviet Union, turned American power into a dual-force advantage. Soviet trains carried troops and weapons built in the United States. American trucks moved Soviet infantry. American fuel powered Soviet planes. Still, Hitler in his bunker underestimated every move. He did not understand that the United States was a growing war machine, where each temporary defeat only strengthened experience and organization. And so, while he dreamed of American collapse, America was learning, mobilizing, and growing. Every industrial city, every port, every trained soldier added to a rising power that no prejudice could diminish. The world was about to witness a decisive turning point, and Hitler had no idea. By mid-1943, Hitler still underestimated the Americans. He believed that crossing the Mediterranean, landing on Italian shores, and fighting seasoned German troops would crush their spirit. To him, America was a nation of inexperienced dreamers, incapable of sustaining prolonged combat in foreign lands. But reality would prove otherwise. The invasion of Sicily in July 1943 marked the first major test. American soldiers faced well-entrenched German and Italian forces. Initial resistance was fierce, and Hitler, observing from Berlin, scoffed at the amateurish assaults. He expected American units to falter and retreat under pressure. Yet, Every setback became an opportunity for learning. The Americans adapted quickly, coordinating amphibious assaults, artillery support, and air cover with a precision that stunned their enemies. Beachheads at Gela and Licata were established, proving that American planning, logistics, and determination could overcome even the most fortified positions. From Sicily, the campaign pushed into mainland Italy. Landings at Salerno and Anzio were contested fiercely, but American divisions held, fought, and advanced. German generals, including Field Marshal Kesselring, could no longer dismiss the Americans as weak or undisciplined. Their operational effectiveness, combined with material superiority, gave them an edge that even Hitler's expectations could not anticipate. Across Italy, Americans demonstrated a remarkable combination of courage, ingenuity, and industrial power. Tanks and trucks produced in the United States allowed forces to maneuver across difficult terrain. Artillery and air support devastated German positions, while supply lines maintained by American logistics ensured that no unit was left unsupported. Meanwhile, strategic bombing campaigns intensified. B-17s and B-24s, escorted by P-51 Mustangs, struck deep into German industrial centers. Factories, oil refineries, and rail networks suffered devastating losses. Hitler, still clinging to the belief that the Luftwaffe would dominate the skies, watched in disbelief as American air power proved decisive. By late 1943 and early 1944, the Italian campaign had become a showcase of American strength. Soldiers who once seemed inexperienced now executed complex operations with skill and confidence. Every victory, every advance, eroded Hitler's ideological assumptions about American weakness. But the true test would come in 1944. The Allied planning for the Normandy invasion demanded coordination on an unprecedented scale. American forces, working alongside British and Canadian troops, would land on the beaches of France, supported by a fleet of thousands of ships and landing craft, millions of tons of supplies, and air superiority that stretched from England to the French coast. Hitler, convinced that Americans could be intimidated or outmaneuvered, could not grasp the full scale of their mobilization. Yet, as D-Day approached, the Americans were ready, not just to fight, but to dominate. The logistical, industrial, and operational power amassed over 2 years of war was about to be unleashed in a decisive strike that would change the course of history. In Italy, in the Mediterranean, and across the skies of Europe, the Americans had already demonstrated that their initial reputation as inexperienced dreamers was completely wrong. Each victory was a lesson learned, each challenge an opportunity to grow stronger. The United States was no longer underestimated. It was a rising superpower, capable of projecting force across continents, sustaining multiple campaigns, and turning the tide against the Axis. And Hitler? He still underestimated them. Until the moment the Americans stormed the beaches of Normandy, he had not fully grasped the scale of the power he faced. The power of a nation that had learned, adapted, and grown into an unstoppable force. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Hitler, still blinded by his prejudices, believed the Americans would falter at the first sign of heavy resistance. They are inexperienced, he thought. They will break under German fire. He could not imagine the scale of preparation, the precision of planning, or the sheer determination of the men and women behind the operation. Across the English Channel, the largest amphibious invasion in history was underway. Over 150,000 troops stormed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. Ships and landing craft carried thousands of men armed with weapons forged in American factories. Bombers and fighters patrolled the skies, ensuring air superiority. Hitler had assured Germany that the Atlantic Wall would hold. He had promised the German people that American soldiers would crumble under pressure. Yet, as paratroopers landed behind enemy lines and infantry advanced across heavily defended beaches, the reality was clear. The Americans were relentless. On Omaha Beach, the fighting was brutal. Waves of men faced machine guns, artillery, and obstacles designed to stop them. Hitler would have smiled at the initial chaos, expecting surrender. But the Americans pushed forward. They adapted under fire, coordinated across units, and refused to yield. Each fallen comrade was replaced by another, thanks to the industrial might and logistical planning of the United States. On Omaha Beach, the fighting was brutal. Waves of men faced machine guns, artillery, and obstacles designed to stop them. Hitler would have smiled at the initial chaos, expecting surrender. But the Americans pushed forward. They adapted under fire, coordinated across units, and refused to yield. Each fallen comrade was replaced by another, thanks to the industrial might and logistical planning of the United States. Meanwhile, General George Patton's Third Army prepared for its legendary maneuvers. Within weeks, American forces had broken out from Normandy, liberated Paris, and surged across France with a speed that stunned German commanders. Hitler's prediction of weakness had been shattered. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 was Hitler's desperate attempt to reclaim the initiative. He believed he could surprise and overwhelm American forces in the Ardennes. Initially, the Germans achieved tactical shock, and Hitler reveled in what he thought would be the Americans' collapse. But within 72 hours, American forces regrouped. Reinforcements arrived. Artillery and air power devastated German armor. The 101st Airborne held Bastogne against encirclement. When demanded to surrender, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's famous response, "Nuts," symbolized the determination that Hitler had refused to believe possible. American troops, once underestimated as inexperienced and disorganized, demonstrated courage, adaptability, and tactical skill that rivaled even the German Wehrmacht. Each victory reinforced the fact: the United States was no longer a peripheral power. It was a decisive force shaping the outcome of the war. Crossing the Rhine in March 1945 marked another milestone. Hitler's generals had assumed the river would be a final barrier, but American engineers built bridges under fire, and troops crossed with speed and precision. German defenses crumbled. The Reich, which Hitler had promised would endure for 1,000 years, faced a nation that combined industrial might, scientific innovation, and military excellence. At the same time, American industrial power continued to pour forth. Trucks, tanks, artillery, ammunition. The material advantages were overwhelming. Factories produced at rates the Germans could not match. Airplanes dominated the skies. And the scientific triumph of the Manhattan Project loomed as a force Hitler could not imagine. By the spring of 1945, American forces had linked with the Soviets in central Germany. Hitler, trapped in his bunker, could no longer dismiss the Americans as weak. The reality was unavoidable. The nation he had underestimated had grown into a global superpower. It was America's industrial might, tactical brilliance, and unwavering resolve that had crushed Nazi Germany. The lessons were clear. Prejudices, ideological arrogance, and underestimating the enemy were catastrophic errors. And while Hitler had clung to his racial and strategic myths until the very end, American power, determined, adaptive, and unstoppable, had rewritten history. In every factory, every battlefield, every airfield and port, the United States had proven that strength is more than ideology. It is the courage to act, the will to endure, and the capacity to turn adversity into victory. And that is how America emerged not only as a victor in World War II, but as a superpower whose reach and influence would shape the world for generations. By the spring of 1945, the world watched as Hitler's illusions crumbled. From his bunker in Berlin, he clung to outdated beliefs that the Americans were weak, divided, and incapable of sustained warfare. He could not fathom the industrial might, the strategic genius, and the unbreakable resolve of the United States. American forces, forged in the fires of North Africa, Italy, and Normandy, now stood on German soil. Cities fell, bridges were seized, and the once mighty Wehrmacht faced an enemy it could not outmaneuver or outproduce. Every river crossed, every town liberated, and every battle won was a testament to what the United States had become, a global superpower. Hitler had misjudged the Americans from the start. He had believed that racial theories, ideological purity, and authoritarian discipline would prevail over democracy, diversity, and industrial ingenuity. He was wrong. Every defeat, every setback for Germany was amplified by the Americans' material superiority and operational competence. From the factories to the front lines, the United States showcased an unprecedented combination of power and purpose. Tanks rolled off assembly lines faster than Germany could destroy them. Bombers struck German cities with precision. American ingenuity delivered synthetic fuel, trucks and artillery in endless supply. And the Manhattan Project, a secret that Hitler could not penetrate, promised a weapon that would end the war in the Pacific and redefine global power forever. In the Ardennes, Bastogne, and across the Rhine, American soldiers refused to surrender, even when surrounded and outnumbered. The courage of men and women on the front lines proved that strength is not born from ideology alone, but from unity, determination, and the will to defend freedom. By April 1945, German defenses were collapsing. American and Soviet forces linked in central Germany, cutting the Reich in two. Hitler's declaration of war against the United States, once a catastrophic miscalculation, had sealed Germany's fate. The nation he dismissed as weak had become the decisive force in Europe. The story of victory is not only in the battles won, but in the transformation of a nation. From a relatively isolated country in 1941 to the world's most powerful military and industrial force in 1945, America had proven its capability to mobilize, innovate, and lead. Allied victory was ensured not just by numbers, but by strategy, courage, and the belief that freedom was worth fighting for. As American troops raised their flags over Berlin, as cities celebrated liberation, and as the news of Japan's surrender reached home, the United States emerged from World War II as a symbol of resilience and power. Hitler's underestimation of America had been his greatest mistake. The lesson was clear. Never doubt a nation whose strength lies in the courage of its people, the ingenuity of its minds, and the unity of its purpose. The Americans had not only defeated a tyrant, but had shown the world that freedom, determination, and industrial might could overcome even the darkest threats. And in doing so, the United States had stepped onto the global stage, not merely as a victor, but as a superpower whose legacy would shape the 20th century and beyond.